Ethan Cole stood near the wide observation window of the diplomatic vessel and watched the stars go still. The ship had stopped moving. That meant they had arrived. The station outside was enormous. It looked like something that had been built without a plan. Massive iron-gray towers bolted to older iron-gray towers. Thick cables running in every direction. Docking arms stretching out like the legs of some enormous dead creature. There were no soft edges anywhere. No glass. No color. Everything about it said the same thing. The people who built this did not care what it looked like. They only cared that it held. This was Gorath Prime, the main fortress station of the Krath Dominion. Ethan had read the briefing files 3 times on the way over. He knew the numbers. The Krath were, on average, between 6 and 8 feet tall. They had dense bone structures, gray or dark brown skin, and ridges of hardened bone along their jaws, forearms, and shoulders. They had been a warrior culture for over 4,000 years. They controlled a large section of navigable deep space that human ships needed access to, and they had never once been impressed by anything humanity had put in front of them. He knew all of this. What he did not know, until Ambassador Owen Price pulled him into a side corridor 10 minutes before docking, was what had been decided on his behalf. Price was a tall man with thinning hair and a very practiced expression of calm. He had been in diplomacy for 20 years and had learned to deliver bad news the way a doctor delivers a diagnosis, with distance and with the faint suggestion that it was somehow for your own good. "The agreement has been signed," Price said. "It was finalized 2 weeks ago at the upper level. The Krath will allow full passage rights through their sector for 10 years. In exchange, the human delegation provides a bonded consort to Clan Dreth." A bonded consort. It is a Krath political tradition. Offering a consort from a lesser party signals submission and good faith. From their perspective, it is actually a gesture of trust. "From their perspective," Ethan said. "You were selected because your file shows strong psychological resilience, conflict training, and adaptive thinking. You are not being sent in blind. You will have communication access, basic." "Sir," Ethan said quietly, "who signed off on this without telling me?" Price had the decency to pause before he answered. "The decision was made at a level above both of us." Ethan said nothing after that. He turned and looked back out the corridor window at the approaching station. Price waited for an argument. He did not get one. Ethan simply nodded once, slowly, and walked back to his bunk to collect his bag. That, Price thought, was either very healthy or very dangerous. He was not sure which. The docking process took an hour. The human delegation, 12 people in formal gray coats, was escorted through 2 sets of massive blast doors and into a long hall made entirely of dark stone. The ceiling was so high that the top of it was lost in shadow. Standing along the walls were Krath warriors in full ceremonial armor, holding long-bladed weapons at their sides. None of them spoke. None of them moved. At the far end of the hall stood the bonding platform. Ethan walked the length of the hall beside Price and tried to observe everything without looking like he was observing everything. He noted the positions of the warriors, the exits, the layout of the room. He noted that the Krath watching them did not look hostile. That was somehow worse. Vora of Clan Dreth was already standing on the platform when they arrived. She was, without question, the most physically imposing person Ethan had ever stood next to. She was nearly a full foot taller than him, and where he was lean and average in build, she was constructed like something that had been engineered specifically to survive violence. The bone ridges along her jaw were sharp and pale against her dark gray skin. Her arms, resting at her sides, were corded with muscle. She wore warrior's ceremonial dress, dark leather and hammered metal, and her expression was the expression of someone who had been asked to stand in a line at a government office for the 4th time in a week. She glanced at him once, just once, then she looked forward again. The ceremony was conducted in craft by an elder in long robes. A translation unit on Ethan's collar gave him a quiet running version in English. Most of it was formal language about clan bonds and political agreements, and the obligations of both parties. At one point, the elder said something that translated roughly as, "The lesser party accepts the honor of this union with gratitude and humility." Ethan kept his face very still. Near the end of the ceremony, Vora turned to him and spoke in rough but clear human standard. Her voice was low and flat. "You will not speak unless spoken to. You will not touch anything in my chambers without permission. You will not embarrass this clan." There was a small pause. Several craft officials nearby were watching to see how the human responded. Ethan looked up at her calmly. "Sure," he said. A few of the craft officials laughed, short, surprised sounds, like they had not expected the word. The laughter was not kind. It was the laughter of people watching something small try to act like it was not small. Vora did not laugh. She studied his face for one more second, as if she was trying to find the thing she was expecting to see there. Fear, maybe, or embarrassment, and could not locate it. Then she looked away. After the ceremony, Ethan was shown to his quarters by a young craft attendant who said nothing and walked very fast. The room was small, clean, and entirely without decoration. There was a narrow sleeping platform, a water unit on the wall, and a single high window that showed a sliver of deep space outside the station. The room was connected to Vora's chambers by a corridor with a heavy door at each end. Both doors were closed. He sat down on the edge of the sleeping platform and looked at the floor for a while. Then he pulled out the small encrypted communicator from inside his jacket and opened a channel to his brother. Cale Cole appeared on the small screen a few seconds later in a Navy uniform with his collar undone. He took one look at Ethan's face and said, "How bad?" "I have been assigned as a political consort to a 7-foot alien warrior on a fortress station in the middle of nowhere," Ethan said. Cale stared at him. "Are you serious?" "I am very serious. Are you okay?" Ethan thought about it honestly. "I will figure it out," he said. Cale was quiet for a second. Then he said, "You always do." They talked for a few more minutes about nothing important. Cale's ship, the weather back home, whether their mother had fixed the fence she kept saying she would fix. Then the connection closed, and Ethan was alone again. He lay back on the sleeping platform and stared at the ceiling. The station made sounds around him, low groans and hums, the deep mechanical breathing of something enormous and old. It was not comforting, but it was not frightening either. He listened to it for a long time. He had not been asked. He had not been warned. He had been placed here, like a piece on a board, by people who thought of him as a small and manageable problem. He stared at the ceiling and made a decision. It was not a dramatic decision. It did not come with any particular feeling of fire or resolve. It was just a quiet, firm conclusion, the kind that settles into a person like a stone settling into the ground. He was not going to disappear. The morning came in the way mornings do on a space station, not with sunlight, but with the slow brightening of the overhead strips and the compound's gradual shift from night quiet to day noise. Somewhere in the lower corridors, a door opened. Somewhere in the training yard, the first sounds of movement started. The station breathed and rumbled and went on being itself. Ethan was already awake. He had been awake for a while. He washed, dressed, and sat on the edge of his sleeping platform for a few minutes with his hands resting on his knees. He looked at the room, the narrow space, the water unit on the wall, the high window with its sliver of deep space. He had arrived in this room with one bag and no expectations. And somewhere in the 3 months since then, It had started to feel less like a holding cell and more like a place where a person lived. He picked up his bag, looked at it for a second, and then set it back down. He left the room and went to the docking corridor. Ambassador Price was already there. He had the junior attachés with him again, and the honor escort, and the practiced expression of a man who had prepared remarks. The diplomatic vessel was visible through the docking arch, its white hull catching the pale light of the dock lamps. It was a clean and orderly ship. It smelled, even from here, like recycled air and coffee, and the particular institutional calm of a place where everything was managed. Price saw Ethan coming and stepped forward with his hand out. "Cole, right on time. We have a debrief scheduled for the transit home. Nothing formal, just Ethan said. "I am not boarding." Price's hand stayed where it was for a moment. Then he lowered it. "I beg your pardon?" "I am staying," Ethan said. "I wanted to tell you directly, which is why I came down here. I did not think it was right to just not show up." Price looked at him carefully, the look of a man running calculations. "Cole," he said, with measured patience, "I understand that this experience has been unusual, intense even. But what you are describing is the end of your career in the service. It is the end of any formal diplomatic standing you have. You would be staying on a foreign military station with no human institutional protection. No. I know all of that," Ethan said. Price stopped. He tried a different angle. "Your family," he said, and I am quoting directly here, "that this is extremely strange, but also somehow the least surprising thing I have ever done," which I think was his way of saying he understands. Price was quiet, for what Ethan later described to Cale as nearly 15 full seconds, which was a record. He seemed to be cycling through arguments, and finding them landing poorly, one after another. Finally, with the tone of a man accepting a situation he cannot change, Price asked if Ethan wanted to send any formal resignation documentation through the delegation's channel. Ethan said yes, if Price did not mind, and thank you for the offer of the position back home. He had thought about it seriously. They shook hands. Price looked at him one last time, with an expression that was impossible to read, somewhere between frustration and something quieter than that. Then he turned and walked to the ship, and the attachés followed, and the docking arch sealed behind them. Ethan stood at the docking window and watched the vessel disengage from the berth. It moved slowly at first, then faster, and then it was a point of white light against the dark, and then it was gone. He stood there a moment longer. Then he turned and walked back into the compound. He passed the training yard, where the morning session was already going. He passed the corridor, where Saya was sitting cross-legged on a bench, the card game spread out in front of her, apparently playing against herself. She looked up when she heard him. Her eyes went to his empty hands. No bag, no coat, no indication of departure. Her face did not change. She was craft, and she had learned composure from people who treated it like a survival skill. But she looked back down at her cards just a little too quickly, and Ethan noticed. He kept walking. He found Vora in the high courtyard, standing at the railing overlooking the docking spire, the same place she had been standing the last time he had something important to say to her. He wondered if she came here when she was thinking, or whether she had come here specifically because she thought she might need to see the ship leave. He stood beside her at the railing. He looked out at the spire, at the empty berth where the diplomatic vessel had been. "I stayed," he said. She did not look at him immediately. She looked at the empty berth for a moment. Then she said, "I see that." "I want to be clear about why," he said. "It is not dramatic. I am not doing this because of some grand decision. I am staying because this place is interesting, and you are interesting, and also because the pressure fault in the Eastern Maintenance Ring has been there for 11 years, and it is genuinely going to cause a serious problem in about 6 weeks if no one addresses it, and I find that difficult to walk away from." She was quiet for a second. Then she said, in a tone that was very carefully controlled, "You are staying because of a pipe fault." "Partly," he said. "The pipe fault is a significant factor." She turned to look at him. He looked back. There was a long pause in which neither of them said anything, and the station hummed around them, and somewhere below in the yard the morning training continued, and the stars outside the high observation panels did what stars always do, which is nothing and everything. Her expression did not change. Something small and careful that she did not try to hide, exactly. More like she decided, for once, not to cover it. "You are the strangest creature I have ever encountered," she said. "I have heard that before," he said. 3 days later, StHFY called a full clan assembly. The great hall was packed. Every senior member, every warrior of standing, every elder and officer and ranking figure in Clan StHFY stood in their places along the tiered walls. Ethan stood at the center of the floor. He had been told to wear the best thing he had, which was a clean version of the compound work gear, so he wore that. StHFY spoke for some time in formal craft. The translation unit on Ethan's collar kept pace. StHFY said that the human who had come to them as a political arrangement had, in the preceding months, demonstrated soul weight in a manner recognized by the right, by the combat, and by a choice made freely at personal cost. He said that a bond given freely and kept by choice was a different thing from a bond made by political necessity. He said that Clan StHFY did not have many traditions left regarding outsiders choosing to stay. But it had one. He called Ethan forward. The clan mark ceremony was brief and quiet. An elder pressed a small heated seal to the back of Ethan's right hand. A formal symbol, austere and clean, that marked him not as a consort or a political attachment, but as a bonded member of Clan StHFY by his own choosing. It had not been granted to anyone outside the craft in 40 years. Several senior warriors looked like they had opinions about this. They looked at StHFY's expression and kept those opinions to themselves. Saya, standing near the back of the hall, was crying. She was also loudly insisting to the warrior beside her that she was not crying, and that whatever was on her face was a result of the dust in the hall, and that the warrior should mind their own business. Vora stood beside Ethan through the whole ceremony, with her chin raised and her arms at her sides, and her face in the composed, controlled expression she wore when something mattered to her, and she did not want anyone to see how much. Ethan had learned to read that expression very well by now. He did not say anything about it. He was getting better at knowing when not to speak. That evening, after the assembly had emptied and the hall had gone quiet, Ethan sat in the high courtyard with a small lamp and a sheet of drafting material, sketching out the preliminary plan for repairing the eastern maintenance ring pressure fault. It was detailed work, the kind that required full attention, and he gave it that. At some point, Vora came and sat on the stone bench above him. She had a blade in her hand, one she maintained most evenings, a long, curved thing that she handled with the casual ease of long practice. She did not say anything. She sat and ran the whetstone along the edge in slow, even strokes, and the quiet sound of it mixed with the background noise of the compound, voices somewhere, metal somewhere else, the deep old hum of the station. It was an ordinary evening. It was an ordinary moment in an alien place orbiting a star that had no name in any human language, and two people sitting in a courtyard, not talking, just present, just there, in the way that people are when they are somewhere they have chosen to be. Ethan looked up once from his schematic. Vora was already looking at him. Not with the evaluating look of the early days, and not with the careful, controlled look she wore in public. Just looking. Clear and direct and unhidden. He looked back. Neither of them said anything. They did not need to. The first week on Gorath Prime was quiet, in the way that a held breath is quiet. Ethan did not push anything. He did not try to make friends or introduce himself to anyone. He woke early, ate whatever was put in front of him without complaint, and spent his days moving carefully through the parts of the compound he was allowed to access. He kept his eyes open and his mouth mostly closed. He watched. The Krath compound was enormous, a working fortress station that housed not just warriors, but engineers, traders, medical staff, and the families of the senior clan members. It was loud in the mornings and at meal times, and quiet in the long stretches between. The warriors trained in an open yard near the center of the compound for several hours each day. The sound of it, bodies hitting stone, blades striking practice dummies, the short, sharp commands of the training officers, became the background rhythm of Ethan's days. He watched the training from a distance at first, then closer. Nobody told him to leave, so he stayed. He studied how they moved, where the weight was, when they committed, when they held back. He was not planning anything. He was just collecting information, the way he always did when he was somewhere new and uncertain. It was the only thing that made him feel like himself. He noticed other things, too. The water distribution pipe on the eastern wall of the residential corridor made a knocking sound every morning around 6. The kind of knock that meant trapped air in the line, which meant a partial blockage somewhere upstream. He mentioned it to a low-ranking technician he passed one afternoon, a younger Krath who looked startled that the human was speaking to him at all. Ethan asked, simply, if he could borrow a pressure tool and a section map of that corridor's plumbing. The technician stared at him for a moment, then went and got both, without saying why. An hour later, Ethan had found the blockage, a corroded valve 2 junctions back, and cleared it. The knocking stopped. He returned the tools and went back to his room. He did not tell anyone he had done it. He did not think it was worth mentioning. But the technician mentioned it, and then others did. And then, slowly and without any announcement, the story of the human who asked for a pressure tool and fixed a pipe that nobody had bothered to fix in 3 years moved through the compound in the quiet way that small strange things do. She said nothing. She observed him in the way she might observe a weather pattern, not with interest exactly, but with a kind of automatic attention. He did not behave the way she had expected. She had dealt with political consorts before, from 2 other species, and both had spent their time either trying to make themselves useful in obvious performative ways, or had retreated completely and stayed out of sight. Ethan did neither. He was simply present. He moved through the compound at his own pace, looked at things he found interesting, and did not seem particularly concerned with what anyone thought of him. It was, she decided, either confidence or stupidity. She had not yet determined which. She tested it, a few times. She made a point of speaking to him curtly in front of others. He responded without embarrassment. She gave him a task that was technically beneath anyone of even minor standing, sorting a pile of old supply manifests that her junior staff had been avoiding. He did it thoroughly, and then left a note beside the finished stack, pointing out 3 recurring errors in the inventory system that were causing the manifest to accumulate in the first place. She read the note twice. She did not thank him, but she forwarded the note to her supply officer. The moment that changed things most, however, happened at the clan feast on the 15th day. Clan feasts were loud, long events. The hall was full of warriors and senior members. Food was heavy and plentiful, and the atmosphere was one of relaxed dominance, everyone performing ease and strength for everyone else. Ethan sat near the lower end of the table, where the less important guests and lower-ranking members were placed. He ate and watched and said very little. A younger warrior named Broke, broad-shouldered even by craft standards, and known for enjoying the discomfort of others, eventually noticed Ethan. He announced loudly, that it was traditional at feasts to test the strength of new members. He said it with a grin that told the table exactly what kind of test he had in mind. A grip contest. 2 people locked hands and pushed until one gave. It was entirely a test of raw physical strength. Broke was approximately twice Ethan's body weight and had forearms like 2 bundles of iron cable. Ethan accepted without hesitating. He lost in about 4 seconds. Broke drove his hand flat to the table without any effort at all. The hall laughed, not cruelly, but with the easy amusement of people watching something obvious happen. Ethan sat up, looked at his hand, flexed his fingers, and said, "One more." Broke smiled wider and put his hand out again. This time, instead of matching the grip, Ethan shifted his angle at the moment of contact, rotating slightly, changing the pressure point, using a joint control technique from his military hand-to-hand training that had nothing to do with strength and everything to do with where force was applied. Broke's arm bent the wrong way, and his shoulder dipped in suddenly, without fully understanding how. He was off balance and going down. His elbow hit the table. His face hit the space where dignity used to be. The hall went very quiet. Ethan did not celebrate. He did not raise his hands or say anything clever. He just picked up his cup, took a drink, and said in the same flat tone as always, "Physics." Then he went back to his food. Broke sat up slowly. He did not look angry exactly. He looked like a person who had just been shown something they needed to think about for a while. He looked at his own arm, then at Ethan, then back at his arm. At the high table, StHFY the Elder had not moved. He was a massive figure, even seated, older, heavier, with deep lines in his gray face, and eyes that had the particular quality of eyes that had seen a great deal and were still watching. He had been watching Ethan since the grip contest ended. He did not look away for a long time after. Vora, seated 2 places from her father, had also not looked away. She was watching Ethan with the focused stillness of a predator that has just encountered something it cannot yet name. She had seen hundreds of warriors lose a contest and make excuses, or win and perform. She had never seen anyone lose, ask for a second round, and then solve the problem differently. She watched him finish his meal. She watched him talk briefly with StayHFY, who had appeared at his side from nowhere, like she always did, and was now apparently asking him questions about something. With great urgency, he answered her patiently, drawing something on a small piece of material with a marking tool. StayHFY stared at whatever it was like it was a miracle. Vora looked down at her own plate and realized she had not been eating. She picked up her fork. She told herself she was not thinking about him. The announcement came on a gray morning through the compound's central broadcast system, in a voice so formal and flat that at first Ethan thought it was a maintenance notice. It was not a maintenance notice. StHFY the Elder had called a right of consideration. Ethan sat in his room and listened to the translation unit render the full announcement in English. The right of consideration was an old craft tradition, older than the station, older than most of the alliance agreements the clan had ever signed. It was reserved for rare occasions when an outsider bonded to the clan needed to be formally evaluated. Evaluated for what the craft called soul weight, the inner quality of a person that determined whether they were truly worth the space they occupied in the world. It had not been called for a consort in living memory. Everyone in the compound understood what it meant. This was aimed at Ethan. This was StHFY telling his clan, and the human delegation who would certainly hear about it, that the small one needed to be tested before anyone would take the bond seriously. If Ethan refused, the bond was dissolved. The political agreement collapsed. 10 years of human passage rights through craft space went with it. Ambassador Price would be furious. The upper levels of human diplomacy would be furious. Ethan's career, such as it was, would be over. If Ethan accepted and failed badly enough, The same result followed. He sat with this for about 3 minutes. Then he sent a short message to the Elder's attendant, confirming his participation and asking what time the first stage would begin. The attendant replied within the hour. The rite would last 3 days, 1 stage each day. It would begin the next morning. Ethan spent the rest of the day eating a good meal, sleeping as much as he could, and not thinking about it more than necessary. He had learned a long time ago that turning fear over and over in your hands before an event only made you worse at the event. The first stage began at dawn. It was an endurance march through the station's lowest maintenance corridors, the sublevels, where the station's oldest infrastructure lived. It was dark down there, lit only by occasional wall strips in dull orange, and it was hot in the way that enclosed industrial spaces are hot. Thick, unmoving heat that sat on you like something solid. The air was poor. It smelled of old metal and something organic that Ethan decided not to identify. The route had been marked. He was given no tools, no light source of his own, and no company. A craft timing official at the entry arch noted his start time without expression. The standard completion time for a craft warrior was under 2 hours. Ethan walked into the dark. The first 40 minutes were uncomfortable, but manageable. The air got thicker. The route twisted through maintenance shafts and access corridors so low he had to duck in places. Twice he had to cross sections of flooring where the grating had partially collapsed, stepping carefully across the exposed beams in near total darkness. His eyes adjusted as much as they could. His hands found walls when they needed to. Around the 90-minute mark, moving through a section of older pipe housing, he caught his left forearm on a broken mounting bracket in the dark. He felt the skin open. It was not a small cut. He kept moving. He came out of the sub-level entrance 2 hours and 40 minutes after he had gone in. He was breathing hard, soaked through with sweat, coated in grime from the walls, and bleeding steadily from the cut on his forearm. StHFY's attendant was waiting, with a small group of observers. He looked at them. The attendant stepped forward and asked, in formal craft, if the participant required medical assistance before proceeding. Ethan said he would like water and a cloth for his arm. Then he asked what time the second stage started tomorrow. Nobody laughed. Nobody said anything at all, at first. Then one of the observers, an older warrior with a long scar across his chin, made a short sound that was not quite approval, but was not nothing either. The second stage took place in the clan's formal assembly hall. It was a memory and oral recitation trial. A designated speaker recited, at a standard craft pace, the full lineage and recorded battle honors of Clan StHFY, a list that went back 11 generations and covered more than 400 individual names, dates, and events. Ethan listened to the full recitation once. Then he was asked to repeat it. His human memory was not built for this. He knew that before he started. He recited as much as he could hold, moving carefully through the names and events, reconstructing the structure of it from the patterns he had caught, rather than from pure recall. He made 3 errors. The observers noted them without comment. But in the middle of the recitation, he paused at the account of a battle from 6 generations back. A campaign in which Clan StHFY had held a narrow station corridor against a force 3 times their number for 6 days with minimal supplies. He paused, and then he made a connection. He talked about a human general from centuries ago who had held a mountain pass in a European winter campaign under nearly identical strategic conditions, outnumbered, undersupplied, fighting for terrain rather than victory, exhausting the enemy's will rather than their bodies. He drew the comparison carefully and clearly. He was doing what he always did with information, looking for the thing underneath it that made sense. The hall was very quiet by the time he finished. StHFY, seated at the head of the room, had leaned forward at some point during the comparison. He had not leaned back. The third stage was combat. The warrior Dreth chose was named Hare. He was bigger than Vora, which meant he was significantly bigger than Ethan. He fought with the controlled power of someone who had been training since childhood, and had never once needed to fight dirty, because he had never needed to fight at all. Pure strength and technique were always enough. The bout was not a duel to unconsciousness. It was a structured contest, with a referee and set rounds. It was still, by any reasonable measure, deeply unpleasant for Ethan. He went down the first time in under a minute. He got up. He went down the second time from a body strike that he did not fully see coming. He lay on the stone floor and looked at the ceiling and counted to 3, then got up. The third and fourth times were variations of the same story. Down, look at the ceiling, get up. After the fourth time, Hare stood over him and looked down and said in Krath, to stay down. There was no malice in it. He said it the way a person says something that is simply true. Ethan lay there. He stared at the ceiling. He took stock of what hurt, which was most things. He thought about the bunk in his room, and the water unit on the wall, and the sliver of space visible through the high window. Then he put his hands on the floor and got up. Hare stepped back. He looked at Ethan with an expression that had changed from earlier. Not pity, not admiration exactly, something more like recognition, like he was seeing something he understood. The referee called the stage complete. The room waited. He looked at Ethan for a long time without speaking. Then he spoke in human standard, clearly and without ceremony, so that everyone in the room understood. The small one has weight, he said. It was 4 words. In Krath culture, in this context, it was everything. The room responded with a low collective sound, not quite applause, more like a shift in the air. Several senior warriors struck their fists once against their chests, which Ethan would later learn was a mark of formal acknowledgement. Vora left the hall without speaking to anyone. Her face was composed, as it always was. But she walked quickly, which was not like her. That night, for the first time since Ethan had been placed in his quarters, the heavy door at the end of the corridor between their chambers was not fully closed. It was open by a few inches, just enough to let the light from her side fall through in a narrow line across the floor of his room. Ethan noticed it. He did not say anything about it. He lay down, and for the first time since arriving on Gorath Prime, he fell asleep without having to work at it. 3 months had passed since the bonding ceremony. Gorath Prime had become, in some quiet and unremarkable way, familiar. Ethan knew the compound now, the way you come to know any place you live in, not just its layout, but its rhythms. He knew when the training yard was loud and when it went quiet. He knew which corridor got cold at night because of a ventilation gap near the upper junction. He knew that the clan's senior cook, a broad and permanently unimpressed Krath named Doth, would sometimes leave a small extra portion of the grain dish on the serving counter if you arrived in the first 10 minutes of the morning meal, and that this was not generosity, but simply an overflow situation that Doth preferred not to deal with. Ethan always arrived in the first 10 minutes. He had also, slowly and without making a production of it, found his way into the small routines of the compound. He helped a young Krath technician redesign the logging system for the Eastern Maintenance Ring, which had been kept on paper records for no reason anyone could explain. He spent 2 afternoons teaching Saya a card game from home, which she then proceeded to beat him at reliably and with great satisfaction. He fixed a door hinge in the lower corridor that had been squeaking for what everyone agreed was an unreasonably long time. None of these things were large. Together, they were something. The Krath did not express warmth easily or obviously, but the compound had shifted around Ethan in ways that were visible if you knew what to look for. Fewer people looked past him when he entered a room. Hare, who had knocked him down 4 times in the trial, now gave him a brief nod in the corridors that was not technically unfriendly. Dreth's attendant had stopped walking so fast when escorting him places. And Vora was different in a way that was harder to name. She did not become warm. That was not who she was. But she began to speak to him in the evenings sometimes, when the day's work was done and the corridor between their chambers had its doors left open. Not long conversations. A question here and there. What do humans eat when they are not on the station? What does the ocean look like in person? Why do humans keep animals as companions inside their homes? She asked these things in the same flat, practical tone she used for everything, and he answered them in the same way. Honestly, without trying to make anything into more than it was. He had learned that she found performance irritating. She did not want people to be impressive at her. She wanted them to be real, and she had so rarely encountered it that she did not quite know what to do when she found it. He let the evenings be what they were. He was sitting with Saya in the courtyard on a Tuesday afternoon. She was attempting to teach him a craft arithmetic game and losing patience with the fact that he was actually quite good at it, when the human diplomatic vessel appeared on the docking register. He found out through Saya first, who heard it from a compound runner. A new human delegation had arrived. He was to report to the formal reception corridor. Ambassador Owen Price was standing near the docking entrance when Ethan arrived, flanked by 2 junior attachés in fresh gray coats. Price had been promoted since Ethan had last seen him. It was visible in the way he held himself, that particular uptightness of a man who has recently been given something, and not yet learned to carry it naturally. Price looked at Ethan's clothes, practical compound work gear, slightly worn, and then at the clan mark on Ethan's collar, which he had been given informal use of after the rite of consideration. Something moved behind Price's eyes. "Cole," he said, with the careful warmth of a man who knows he owes someone something. "It is good to see you well." "Sir," Ethan said. Price explained the situation over the next 10 minutes, in the careful, modulated way he explained all situations. The compact terms had been revised at the diplomatic level. New agreements had been reached through separate channels. The bonded consort arrangement was no longer politically necessary. Ethan was free to leave. His service had been noted. There was, Price added with the tone of someone offering a gift, a clean record waiting for him back home, and a position in the diplomatic support division if he wanted it. "Take a day," Price said. "Process it. We depart the day after tomorrow." Ethan said he understood. He walked back to the compound. He did not, as it turned out, need a full day, but he asked for one anyway, because he wanted to do this right. The news moved through the compound before he had even returned from the docking corridor. The craft were efficient with information in the way that any community is. Walls are thin, runners are quick, and interesting things do not stay private for long. Some members of the compound seemed indifferent. A few of the younger warriors looked oddly, like they were not pleased, though they would not have said so out loud. Saya found him in the courtyard in the late afternoon. She sat down across from him and looked at him directly and asked, without any softening of the question, "Are you going?" "I do not know yet," he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Vora has been in the training yard for 4 hours." He looked at her. She looked back at him with the particular patience of a younger sister who has been watching her older sister not say things for years, and has become very good at saying them for her. He thanked her. She pretended she did not know what he was thanking her for. He found Vora that evening. She was in her chambers, standing at the window that faced the docking spire, watching the human diplomatic vessel sitting in its berth. She did not turn when he entered, which meant she had heard him and chosen not to turn, which told him something. He told her the situation plainly. He said he had been assigned here without anyone asking him, and now for the first time, he actually had a choice. He told her that if she wanted him to leave, he would go without making it complicated. She was quiet for a long time. Then she spoke. It came out differently from the way she usually spoke, slower, and without the clean edges she normally kept on her words. She talked about the 6 campaigns she had fought, and the 4 species she had gone against in battle, and the way that after a lifetime of all of that, she had developed the ability to look at anything or anyone and know within minutes exactly what she was dealing with. She said she had that ability, and it had never been wrong. And then he had arrived, and she had looked at him and had not been able to place him at all. And that had stayed with her. She said the compound had been different since he came. She said she had been different. She said there was no Krath word for what that difference was, which she found unreasonable and genuinely irritating, because there was a Krath word for almost everything. Then she stopped. She stood very straight. She said, and it cost her something to say it, that she was not asking him to stay. That was not what she was doing. She was simply stating facts. The room was quiet. Ethan let the quiet sit for a moment. Then he said, gently, "You used the phrase, hardest to lose." She said, "Stop talking." He stopped talking, but he was smiling. He could not help it. She looked at him. For a long second she looked at him the way she had looked at him on the very first day, trying to find the thing she expected, and not being able to locate it. Except now what she was looking for was not fear or embarrassment. He was not sure what it was. He thought maybe she was not sure either. That was also something. He left her chambers quietly, and stood in the connecting corridor for a moment, with his hand resting on the doorframe, and the weight of a real decision sitting in his chest. Not a duty, not an assignment, a choice. He stood there for a while. The station hummed around him in the dark.